This is the Russini Report. With the Athletic senior NFL insider, Dianna Russini.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. In this edition of the Russini Report, I'm Robert Mays. Joining me, as always, is our senior NFL insider at the Athletic, Dianna Russini. Dianna, how are you?
What do you think? Which play do you think I was reacting to in that photo where I'm like, that right at the start of that? Like, I wonder what I was looking at that I'm like, I'm so confused by this.
I was confused yesterday by the state of kind of the series of events that happened yesterday morning. It always happens this way where we all talked, I don't know at what time, sometime in the middle of the day. And then immediately I see that you reported the Kevin Byard trade happened from the Titans to the Eagles, which is always how it seems to be with all of this stuff. It's after the meeting. It's after your recording. Phillies trade for Kevin Byard, 2 mid-round picks, kind of the equivalent of a third-round pick. Feels like this kind of sets off trade deadline season in the NFL, one of the first big dominoes to fall. And the first question I wanted to ask you about that deal and then maybe what the next week is going to look like, do we feel like the Titans are done, or do they seem like the type of team that could maybe define the series and flurry of moves we're going to see here over the next week?
Yeah, big picture in terms of this trade deadline coming up next week. You know, on Friday, I had one GM say a lot of this is like a first date right now. Everyone is just kind of flirting a little bit, and it should pick up this week. And that's exactly what we saw from Tennessee and Philadelphia yesterday afternoon. And I had known that Philadelphia had the feelers out. Howie Roseman was really scanning the market over the last week or so, looking for a veteran safety. And when he landed on Tennessee, it actually made the most sense knowing what the Kevin Byard contract looks like and where the Tennessee Titans are overall. You know, and Robert, I don't get this fire sale sense coming out of Tennessee where they are open to listening to every single player like we're seeing in Denver. I wouldn't even put that as a fire sale either. But they know they need picks. They need draft capital. And they have a lot of players on contracts that they're looking to move on from, right? So Kevin Byard, I mean, he's truly probably one of the best players on this team in terms of overall top to bottom character. You know, and he's been so impactful for this team with such a young defense, especially in that secondary. But for Howie Roseman, this makes all the sense in the world, getting a 5th and 6th round pick, or at least having to give that up. You know, to get Kevin on this team, knowing that they're going to make this a really long run here, it looks like.
We shouldn't be surprised that the Eagles are the ones to kick off the set of moves that we're going to see. Howie Roseman always looking in the couch cushions for an extra mid-round pick here and there to see how he can help his team at this stage. But if the Titans are going to move on from some of those other guys, maybe in a similar situation to Kevin Byard, 30, had to restructure his contract this offseason, makes sense on a lot of different levels. Who might be a couple other Titans that we should keep an eye on here over the next week or so?
Yeah, I think they have to take calls on players like Derrick Henry, right? And I think initially when people hear that, they go, well, if you're trading Derrick Henry, you're trading the season away. Like you're out. But it's something that I heard whispers about last offseason, about them possibly being open to moving him. And they'll tell you, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Rand Carthon, obviously taking over as the general manager in the offseason, was pretty open about saying that that's not what they're doing. But when you look at where they're at, the age of Derrick Henry, and having to start planning for the future, it would make a lot of sense. But the question is going to be, which team is really, truly going to be interested in paying for a running back like Derrick Henry at this point?
There are a lot of teams this offseason that maybe were connected to Jonathan Taylor that at this stage don't seem as likely. The Dolphins must feel really good about their running back rotation, especially when they get Devon Chen back. They just got Jeff Wilson back. So that one doesn't make as much sense as it might have in August when the Taylor conversation was happening. The one team that I would keep coming back to, that they're in it, they're competitive, especially with the way that their defense is playing. Cleveland lost Nick Chubb. And when they did that, did they lose kind of an engine of what they wanted to be on offense? Do the Browns make sense potentially as a landing spot for somebody like Derrick Henry?
You know, I love that you use the comp of which teams were interested in Jonathan Taylor, because that would make the most sense if we're going to just read the tea leaves of perhaps the buyers in the market right now looking to upgrade their ground game. And I never really got the sense from Cleveland that they were looking to add a piece to their running back room. No, in fact, I remember reaching out the second Nick Chubb got hurt, which arguably a little insensitive, but they're going to have to replace the player, and they always were giving me a feeling like we're good here. We're really comfortable with what we've got. So I don't see Andrew Berry getting aggressive with the Tennessee Titans signing a player like Derrick Henry at this point. I do think that they have other needs, and we'll discuss those soon.
Yeah, not necessarily a surprise. An analytically minded organization giving up a draft pick for a running back that's already on a veteran contract. That's not surprising to me. Another team I'd want to bring up, though, let's stick in the AFC North. J.K. Dobbins goes down in week 1. The Ravens have pieced together their running back room with Gus Edwards, with Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell kind of sprinkled in there this week. Do the Ravens potentially make sense as a team where Derrick Henry really fits one of their needs and their timeline as they seem like a real contender in the AFC?
Yeah, Keaton Mitchell definitely had a little bit of a hello, welcome to the NFL moment this past weekend. And I was told that he was going to have an uptick in his usage in the run game, but he wound up getting hurt. So I am curious to see how much they really believe in him. He was described to me as somebody that is, quick as lightning. But is Derrick Henry a better option for them at this point, knowing what we just saw on offense? It's Todd Monken obviously has really added a wrinkle to this team now that looks like they're starting to really click. Because I know we had some questions about it a few weeks ago when we dove into it. Is he really, has this offense really looked better than what Greg Roman was doing? And it's starting to really start. It's looking better, obviously, from what we just saw. So that extra piece on the ground, I mean, you have to figure Baltimore has to make a call here just to see. I don't know if they're going to be willing to pick up a veteran deal like this. I don't know if that's something that Eric DeCosta would even allow happen at this point, but this just seems like a need that could really take this team to the next level.
They have an extra 4th round comp pick most likely next spring because of the contracts given to Josh Oliver and Ben Powers in free agency. So just one more mid-round pick that they might be willing to part with if they know they're getting a 4th back anyway. A couple more guys on the Titans that I think we should hit before moving on. What about Danico Autry, Tyre Tart, Christian Fulton? Some more names that are going to be on the verge of free agency. Tart is an RFA. Danico Autry is a free agent. Christian Fulton contract is up. Are the Titans maybe potentially willing to let go any of those guys for potential contenders?
Robert, I think the point that we got to drive home right now as we're ripping through the roster of the Tennessee Titans is it just seems like this is a team that is willing to be open for business if we're really diving into it this much, right? Yeah. I mean, these are guys that are type of players that I are an important part of the defense specifically. But are they willing to really say, you know what, let's just make some hard decision moves or hard business moves right now for the benefit of the future? And I have a hard time picturing a team just kind of sandbagging the rest of the year, knowing that their head coach, Mike Vrabel, I don't know if he could function in that building or out on the field, knowing that the plan is to just tank. I just think that's a really hard thing to sell. I'd be curious what it was like in that building today, even knowing that Kevin Byard was older. He wasn't the same type of player. I understand all of that, but just understanding the importance of a player like that. What kind of message are you sending to that locker room right now by moving him? And you have to figure if they continue to move big pieces on either side of the ball, whether it's a Christian Fulton or even a player of Derrick Henry's caliber, that is going to be an interesting team to keep together. But I do think the Tennessee Titans are going to be taking calls on all these guys.
Yeah, Danico Autry also in his 30s, also going to be a free agent next offseason. There are guys that make sense where you can part with them and kind of admit to yourself, hey, it doesn't look great. We wanted to compete this year, but based on our current timeline, this does actually track with who we are and who we think we're going to be.
Yeah.
So now we have, go ahead.
Yeah, and you have to figure that Rand Carthon has his, fingerprints all over everything right now. This is his team. Yes, it's the identity of Mike Vrabel, but this is really his opportunity to start flexing a little bit, kind of to show the fan base, show ownership why he was brought in, what he can provide, and sort of what his vision is of the future of this team.
So we thought that, let's move on to some other potential sellers in the market. We figured that Minnesota might be one of those teams after their slow start, but they win 2 in a row. You start looking at that schedule, you start looking at the wild card race in the NFC, and you can start talking yourself into the Vikings as a potential playoff team if things break the right way. So should we still consider the Vikings potential sellers at the deadline?
Yeah, it certainly has changed. And, I had a conversation with the GM last Friday about the impact of these games on a lot of different organizations based on whether or not they're going to be buyers or sellers. And I would put the Minnesota Vikings in the category of a team that may have been flirting with perhaps making some trades, listening to some people that were interested to going, you know what? Maybe we back off this a little bit. Now, that being said, okay, we know that Hunter's been on the trade block for a while now here. I don't get the sense that they're moving off this. I do think this is something they're going to continue to listen to, try to see the best offer they can possibly get. And we'll see what teams would be interested.
I think it makes a lot of sense because they owe it to themselves. And this has, I think, been a conversation topic in that building maybe over the last year or so about how much we want to try to win now, how much we're building for the future. You need to get everyone on the same page. And sometimes that's difficult to parse. But even if they owe it to themselves to kind of see a version of this roster through, that front office still understands they don't have a quarterback under contract next year. So if you can get one more chip for a guy like Danielle Hunter to potentially make a move to go get a quarterback, if that becomes necessary, you can balance those two things. You can try to be competitive while keeping one eye on what your quarterback future looks like. So that's not necessarily surprising.
Yeah, and you paint the perfect picture of the challenge, though. Like it's easy to say and explain it that way, but not always.
It's harder to explain to Kevin O'Connell when he's trying to win football games next week.
And it's funny because that's the face that was kind of in my head as you were explaining it, right? Just knowing the gear that Kevin is in right now specifically. And I don't know if you saw that post-game locker room celebration and the message he was sending to the guys. This is a coach that is trying to win right now. There is no talk about the future. There's no thought process from him right now, right? As he's just trying to get the best from each of his players. So he's going to want the best roster now.
And that's always the fun push and pull, is that's not his job. His job is to win on Sunday no matter what. So I always appreciate how those conversations and how those tensions exist. If the Vikings are not one of those teams that is going to be a seller at the deadline, who are those teams that are potentially looking to make moves in service of their future here over the next week or so?
Yeah, so we made mention of the Denver Broncos, which has been it's been the big name for a lot of the obvious reasons. But let's just start with the fact that I had a conversation with ownership at the league meeting last week just about where they're at as an organization. And my takeaway from it was truly just they believe in Sean Payton's vision.
Looks like we lost Dianna. We'll try and get her back here.
Sounds good. I wasn't wondering if that was me. I had put my headphones click.
If she can, let's. You want to take a 2-minute break here, Robert? And come
Sure.
back?
Let's take a quick break and we'll get Dianna back on and then we'll keep rolling here.
All right, here we go.
Talking about the Denver Broncos as potential sellers, you mentioned that you talked to ownership last week while you were in New York for the league meetings. A little bit more context about where the Broncos are and what that might look like come trade deadline time.
Yeah, this is Sean Payton's team. The identity of what this roster will look like will reflect what Payton wants. And that optimistic hope, belief, and confidence that ownership still has in him really stood out to me when we were discussing just really where they're at right now. And this was before they won over the weekend. So obviously they're not happy with the way the season has gone completely, but I believe that this will not be a true fire sale. They're not cleaning house completely. I do think they're going to be taking calls. And I do think that the defensive side of the ball is an area where they are going to probably make the moves, knowing that those are some of the areas that they want to upgrade.
A little less exciting than a potential Jerry Jeudy trade is a Josie Jewell trade. No offense to Josie Jewell, but those are the sort of moves potentially that you see for the Broncos, maybe subtler back half of the roster moves that aren't the type of star level players that have been bouncing around over the last couple weeks or so.
Yeah, and I know that Peyton really likes Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, and that's even just going back to the offseason when there was interest in both those guys. And I just remember having conversations with Denver outside of Sean as well. Just, no, we like these. We don't want to move them. We like them in this offense, and we think we can continue to build with them. So, unless they get a really good trade package for these guys, I don't think they're the hot item on Denver's list right now of guys that are trying to move out of the building.
A couple other names we've heard a lot about over the last couple days or so are Montez Sweat and Chase Young in Washington. Do you see Washington as a team that could potentially be looking to move a couple of these guys here over the next couple days?
Yeah, I do. And this goes back to even last week when they had some feelers out. They're another team that I would put in the category of waiting to see how the last Sunday and this Sunday will go in terms of their performance, where they sit in the standings, and how they really see the future of this team going. So the fact that they were putting feelers out last week just tells you that they're thinking. And I do know that those conversations have changed a bit this week. So those two guys, obviously Chase Young, Montez Sweat, those are going to be two names that I am going to be keeping an eye on over the next few days, knowing that they're still really good players, that Washington seems to have a future, at least a thought process of moving on without them.
They're young players as well. A lot of these other guys we talked about, think back to the Titans conversation. These are guys at the back half of their contracts last year, their contracts that are usually 30 above. Kevin Byard, Danico Autry, players like that. These are guys that are going to be looking for their second deal. I was surprised to hear both of their names potentially being floated out there because you get one franchise tag. So you can't use it on both of them, but you can use it on one of them. So the fact that both of them potentially teams are making calls about them and there could be some movement, that was a little bit surprising to me. I figured they would pick one or the other.
Yeah, and I did have a conversation with someone in Washington about that, and it seems that they're not trying to trade both of them. They're open to it. I think ideally they would like to keep one and then be open for business with the other. I don't know which one they prefer. I don't know who's the one they're pushing harder at this point. But they have taken calls on both those guys. And maybe perhaps it's one of these situations where they're seeing who's going to get them the best in return. And then they'll ride, and they'll ride with the one that wins by default.
Anyone else that you feel like could be a potential seller? The Jets have a couple guys that have kind of fallen out of the rotation. Carl Lawson, Dalvin Cook. Does New York, even if they kind of see a little glimmer of hope potentially for them in the wild card race, do they feel like a team that could make some moves here?
Yeah, for sure. And you've seen the usage has really been decreasing with running back Dalvin Cook, which is, we go back to the summer. I know you and I were talking a lot about that move and why they were doing it. And I knew Dalvin Cook was told by the Jets front office that, hey, look, you're not going to be our star running back. Breece Hall looks good. He's coming back. And we've really seen his usage decline all season long. And maybe there's an understanding there, but you have to figure the player probably wants to be out there more. And if the Jets can get something in return for a running back needy team, they're going to have to listen to that. And Carl Lawson really hasn't had an impactful year with this Jets team, and just because they're not using him as much. So, and you look at his contract, he is another player where it would just be really business savvy of the New York Jets to move on from him. And, we'll see if they'll be able to find a team that's willing to do that.
Potential sellers. Let's get to potential buyers and teams that might be looking to make a move. I just want to run through some contenders here. Teams obviously they're going to be making a playoff push, and chat about whether or not you think they could be looking to add a piece over the next week or so. Let's start with the Kansas City Chiefs. They obviously made the McCole Hardman move. Are there any other lingering potential moves for Kansas City in your opinion?
We just talked about pass rushers, right? And you kind of look at this Kansas City roster right now and their overall health and the depth. And they're good, right? There's like a big green check mark there. So I don't see the Kansas City Chiefs in the market as buyers or sellers coming up here. I think they're set on this roster.
Cowboys feel like they're in the same place. We don't have to speculate on that. Jerry Jones came out and said that they weren't really looking to make moves. It's always nice when there's very little ambiguity about what the Cowboys are thinking and doing, because he's doing an interview every 20 minutes. So very nice of him to help us out with that. How about the Buffalo Bills as potential buyers at the deadline? Another team that is absolutely contender in the AFC, has hit a little bit of a rough patch here. Are the Bills looking to add, and where might they be looking at a couple pieces?
Yeah, the Bills have been working the phones over the last week or so. I wouldn't put them in the category as pressed. Sometimes you hear about certain teams really pushing hard, like the Raiders are really pushing on trying to get a pass rusher. They're really pushing on trying to trade Hunter Renfrow. That would be in that category. I don't get that, but I do know that they're doing a little bit of work on the defensive side of the ball. They're looking in the secondary to see if they can make some improvements, maybe get a young player there to fill a hole, because we know that they've been dealing with some injuries.
Speaking of pass rushers and who might be pushing for them, on that category of kind of buyers just in the pass rush market, which teams do you think might be potential landing spots for a couple of these guys? Montez Sweat, Chase Young, we mentioned Danielle Hunter potentially. Who is the group on the other side of those potential trades?
Yeah, and you have to figure Washington is not only getting calls, they're making calls. As we know, they're going to try to want to get a really good deal. And a team that would make sense in terms of the pass rush market right now is Jacksonville, right? Because the teams that are going to be buyers at this point have to be teams that we know are trying to make a run here. And we see Jacksonville right now. They're playing really well, but they have needs. This is not a roster that's sound, where we just went to the Kansas City Chiefs. They feel so confident. But Jacksonville could definitely find some usage there. Seattle is a team I had reached out to recently to see if maybe they'd be wanting to add a pass rusher just for depth, and they feel really good where they're at. But of all these teams right now, Jacksonville seems to be the team that stands out the most. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think you look at the Arden Key loss before the season started. They never really replaced him. They're getting really good production out of Josh Allen. But other than that, I think that they still could use some pass rush juice. They got DeJuan Smoot back last week, but he's sort of a tweener. He's not that same type of role that Arden Key filled for them. So I think having one more edge rusher, one more pass rush piece as part of a defense that is playing very well and is playing much better than it did last season, I wouldn't be surprised if they thought they needed just one more little addition there. So let's keep running through some AFC contenders here. How about Cleveland? Do you feel like Cleveland, where their contender might be strong, but their Cleveland is absolutely in the mix? They're an active trade team. Do you feel like the Browns might be looking to make a move or two here over the next week or so?
Yeah, I'd put them in that Bills category of not pressed, but feeling around, kind of making calls, trying to see what is available right now. Receiver is a position I think that they would like to find someone to add there. Obviously, I mentioned Hunter Renfrow is a player that the Raiders are looking to deal. Don't really think that would be the type of player that this team is looking for right now, but I know that they've made some calls there. And offensive line, that is an area where they've had some injuries over the last few weeks. They're healthier now, but again, another position where I don't think depth can hurt them if they're looking to make a run here. Oh, you know what, too?
Yeah,
another area that I'd be interested in as well, Robert.
for the Cleveland Browns is really get backup quarterback, right? So I think PJ Walker did a really good job. Obviously the last 2 weeks of just trying to manage it. But I'd be interested to see if there's any backups in the market that Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski would want or have some interest in.
Yeah, it's been obviously a revolving door. They trade Josh Dobbs, then they have DTR come in, one spot start. That doesn't go well. They have to go to PJ Walker. We don't know what Deshaun Watson's health looks like, so absolutely something worth keeping an eye on. The San Francisco 49ers make the move for Randy Gregory. That seems like it might be their big splash in the market. We're sticking with contenders, maybe looking to do something here. Do you feel like the Niners are done after the Randy Gregory trade?
Yeah, a lot like the Cowboys. They feel really good with their roster. But again, that attitude, John Lynch, same thing with Jerry. Someone's bringing something to the table. They're gonna listen. They're gonna see what's going on. But they feel sound with their roster at this point.
Let's talk about a couple of guys who we know are not getting traded, but their names have been kicked around a little bit as part of these discussions. Is there anyone that you just think, you know what, even if their names have been part of these, I just don't think that they're going to be moved here over the next week?
Yeah, Kirk Cousins at this point is probably the name that we started the month off with. He's on the move and quickly lost all the momentum, and it has nothing to do with Kirk winning last night. It has nothing. It has everything to do with the no trade clause. It has everything to do with the way Minnesota feels about him, them wanting him on the roster, and him, of course, not wanting to leave Minnesota, where their offense has been productive. You take away those takeaways, and just some of the sloppiness, and they could be good, and that's pretty much where we're at right now. So I don't see Kirk Cousins moving. The New York Giants are another team. I think there were some question marks about whether or not they'd be willing to move Saquon Barkley. I do not get the sense that they are moving on from Barkley. In fact, Saquon Barkley spoke at his locker after the game on Sunday and said that he spoke with Joe Shane and Brian Dable about that possibility, and they said, no, that's not going to happen. Granted, I've heard of stories before where players and coaches are told about their future and then everything changes. But that's in line with everything I was told as well, that what Saquon was told to his face. So he's another player I see staying put. And Hollywood Brown out of Arizona, that one was really interesting to me because I thought that was a player that they were willing to shop. And that is not the case. And that's from talking to team sources with the team and also talking to teams that were interested, that they've been told that Arizona's not looking to move him. So he is going to be part of their future.
Arizona's plan over the next 8 weeks or so is one of the most intriguing things about the back half of the NFL season to me. How quickly are we going to see Kyler Murray? What does he look like in that offense? If that offense looks pretty good with him inserted into it, do they feel pretty good about the construct they have with Hollywood Brown, with him, with some of those young offensive linemen? So what the future of the Cardinals looks like and what sort of kernels we can pick up about that over the next couple months, definitely something to keep an eye on. 2 quick things here before we get out of here, not trade deadline related. The brotherly shove and its future in the NFL has obviously been a huge talking point here over the last week or so. Nick Sirianni kind of coming out and really making his case for why it should stick around, for why they should continue to be able to do it. What are the latest league-centric conversations about this play and its place in the league?
Yeah, if you could do it, you would do it, right?
Yeah.
Get to see that on billboards on 95 soon. So the competition committee discussed it during the offseason, and from what I can gather, it was a pretty split thought on whether or not they should keep that play in place, right? So there's some that don't want to take away from the fact that a team that is perfected almost, just because they're good at it and no one else isn't a reason to get rid of a play or to ban it from the league. While there are some that believe that it's ugly, that this is not a play that should be part of football at all, the optics of it all, that it looks like a big car wreck. And I was even told that some high-ranking officials in the league office don't like the way this looks on screen, though, because this is part of entertainment, and that's what football is. And that it's an ugly play. So while I think there's a lot of teams that understand that it works, and obviously Philadelphia has shown that well, but we've seen so many of the teams have so many complications running it. And that's where I think it starts to look ugly, is when you can't execute it. But I do think this is one of those plays that is going to be discussed in the offseason by the competition committee. And I'm curious to see where we land for next year.
If you had to predict whether or not this will be legal in the NFL next year, what would you say?
Gosh, you sound like my husband right now. Don't shoot the messenger here. I think this is going to be a play the NFL winds up banning. I think they're going to ban it because enough people in power don't like the play. Look, it'll come down. The competition committee will discuss it. They'll vote on it. But I think the most powerful people that don't like it are going to wind up getting their way. And the brotherly shove will be dead.
Wow, you're upsetting so many people in the Philadelphia area right now.
I know what I just did. I will not be going to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving this year.
I know you spent a lot of time talking to owners at the league meetings last week. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you, what was the most interesting conversation you had with a member of ownership last week?
Walking up East 48th Street, Stephen Jones and I just had a quick chat about the future of Dak Prescott. And, you know, when you talk to him about Dak, there was no hesitation. And I know he's savvy. He knows he's talking to the media when we're chatting. But my takeaway was they're all in on Dak. They're going to make this work. They're going to get this contract done after the season. He told me they're not going to do any of the business during the year. But that's going to be one of their priorities as soon as this season wraps up, that they've got the confidence that Dak's the future there in Dallas.
That is a little bit, not necessarily surprising, but there has been obviously there's some rumors, some murmurs after the Trey Lance trade. You look at Dak's contract, how much are they going to be willing to pay him? So the fact that he was so emphatic about it, I think does say a lot about what his future looks like in Dallas and just what the team build looks like in Dallas here over the next couple of years. Dianna Russini, thank you very much for the time. We will be back next week to wrap up the trade deadline. So we'll be coming to you guys a little bit later. But until then, appreciate all of you listening. We'll talk to you soon.
See you next week.